This comes on top of days of steady engagement with partners across the region. We're also taking steps at home. In cities across the United States of America, police departments have stepped up. Security around centers of Jewish life. The Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are working closely with state and local law enforcement and Jewish community partners to identify and disrupt any domestic threat that could emerge in connection with these horrific attacks. This is a moment for the United States to come together, to grieve with those who are mourning. Let's be real clear. There is no place for hate in America. Not against Jews, not against Muslims, not against anybody. We reject. What we reject is terrorism. We condemn the indiscriminate evil, just as we've always done. That's what America stands for. You know, just over 50 years ago, I was thinking about it this morning, talking to the Secretary of State, the Vice President in my office. Over 50 years ago, as a young senator, I visited Israel for the first time as a newly elected senator. And I had a long trip, a meeting with Golda Meir in her office just before the Yom Kippur War. And I guess she could see the consternation on my face as she described what was being faced. They were facing. We walked outside in that sort of hallway outside her office to have some photos. She looked at me all of a sudden and said, "Would you like to have a photograph?" And so I got up and followed her out. We were standing there silent, looking at the press. She could tell, I guess, I was concerned. She leaned over and whispered to me, she said, "Don't worry, Senator Biden. We have a secret rep in here in Israel." My word is what she said. We have no place else to go. We have no place else to go. For 75 years, Israel has stood as the ultimate guarantor of the security of Jewish people around the world, so that the atrocities of the past could never happen again. And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening. We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
Mr. President, what was your reaction?
All right, there you have it from President Biden live at the White House. No questions, although he did veer off the script there for a moment, it seemed, toward the end, an address to the American people and to the world, frankly, about the situation in Israel. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons. We knew he'd take a hard line in this speech. He certainly did here, Kaylee. Israel has a duty to respond, he said, calling the acts of Hamas sheer evil, comparing Hamas to the worst of ISIS, and making clear not only we should include the fact that he let us know 14 Americans have been killed in Israel,
yes,
but he is going to make an ask of Congress.
He is. He said he will ask Congress upon its return, and actually, in theory, having a Speaker of the House to take urgent action. In addition to the replenishment of the Iron Dome, he said this is not about party or politics. It's about the security of our world, and he stands ready to approve additional assets as they are needed. In addition to the new information on now at least 14 American citizens being killed in the violence, he said we do now know American citizens are being held hostage by Hamas. That had been one of the questions hanging over this entire thing.
It's pretty remarkable. And many of them hold dual citizenships. In this case, it's a question of, to what extent can Israel work around them? We were talking about this with General Hodges. If there is, in fact, a ground invasion of Gaza, it's going to be very difficult to locate them. Hamas, of course, has been threatening to kill a hostage for every building that is struck by Israel containing civilians. So this is a pretty difficult situation that we're in here, and you've now got the official word from the White House.
Absolutely, and he talked about what Hamas is doing with the hostages, talking about it violating basically every code of conduct when it comes to warfare. And he just really, at the beginning there, Joe, was talking about what exactly we have seen. The reports of infants being killed, infants and their mothers being among those who were abducted by Hamas. Just a really difficult moment, which is why, as much as that message was about Israel and providing Israel what it needs, underscoring the support the U.S. has for Israel, he was also really trying to kind of bring a unity message there as well.
Yeah, the idea of Holocaust survivors being taken hostage in this is a bit too much for people to get their heads around. There is a concern among some Democrats as well that this hard line could create some gray area when it comes to Palestinian civilians versus Hamas, which is a terror organization funded by Iran, and they are two different things. But when the lines turn gray, it can be very difficult to manage. Well,
and you heard the president kind of try to allude that. He said Hamas is not about being pro-Palestinian.
Correct.
They use Palestinians as body shields, I believe is what he just said, to paraphrase his words. And he said multiple times that this is an organization that exists for the purpose of the destruction of Israel and the killing of the Jewish people.
Yeah, it was a carefully written speech in that way. He said, Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and offers nothing but terror and bloodshed. Something to consider today. We waited some time for the president to speak to us. He was obviously on the phone, as he mentioned in the address, with Benjamin Netanyahu only an hour ago. And we'll keep you posted on the latest here from Washington, whether it be the White House or Capitol Hill. Kaylee, we want to update trading. We'll bring things back to New York for a moment here. Charlie Pellet standing by with an eye on Wall Street. Hey, Charlie.
Well, thank you very much, Joe and Kaylee. U.S. stocks right now higher, little changed as President Biden spoke live on Bloomberg Radio, reaffirming American support for Israel and offering U.S. support, saying the United States has Israel's back.
So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. We will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
S&P 500 index right now up 26 points, a gain of 0.6%, just about where it was as the president began speaking. The Dow up 156, up 0.5%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 89, higher by 0.7%. 10-year yield 4.64%, with a 2-year yielding 4.97%. Spot gold down $1.50 the ounce to $18.59. Energy markets, we have seen big swings here today. West Texas intermediate crude is trading lower right now, a drop of 0.5%, $85.96 a barrel. Our coverage continues, again recapping S&P up 27 points, a gain there of 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks for joining. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, alongside Kaylee Lyons. This is Bloomberg Sound On, the fastest show in politics, and just heard from President Biden. Kaylee taking a pretty hard line on the situation in Israel. It's pretty difficult to tell what's going to happen, though, in the next 24 to 48 hours when it comes to Israel's own strategy. They've been amassing troops on the border of Gaza for some time, but we've got American hostages, as we've just learned. You pointed out here, along with many Israeli civilians who are being held captive, and that's certainly going to direct what comes next.
Yeah, and President Biden saying the U.S. is engaged with Israel in terms of how to best retrieve those hostages. But he did say in the speech, as he has said over the course of the last several days, that Israel has a right and indeed a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. The idea that the U.S. is supporting Israel, and I wonder if that does indeed will extend, should they actually have to occupy at least part of this disputed area.
Yeah, we have a lot still to learn abroad and here in Washington, which is why we want to add the voice of Jennifer Welch, one of the best titles, I think, at Bloomberg in Washington, Bloomberg Economics Chief Geoeconomics Analyst. Jenny, welcome. It's great to see you. Welcome to the table and welcome to Bloomberg here in Washington. You're formerly of the Biden administration. You worked with the CIA and you have a unique view on what's going on here. When we consider the idea of geoeconomics, though, How are you viewing what's happening here in Israel with a stock market that seems to think there's no immediate impact? What's got your attention?
No, thanks so much for having me, first of all. So obviously, very early stages of this conflict, there's a lot of different ways in which it can evolve, including the amassing of troops suggests that there is a major military operation in the future, at least towards Gaza. There's also this open question of Iran's involvement and what that might lead to. And the larger the scale of the conflict, obviously, the larger the market impact. But if you look back at some of the past skirmishes we've seen between Israel and Gaza, there tends to be a pretty limited impact, in part because we're not affecting oil directly here. I think we'll just have to see how the conflict evolves, though, to better assess the market reaction.
Well, of course, you heard the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, in the Capitol yesterday, speaking as no one else seemed like they were going to step up and fill that void at the time, Joe, as we discussed yesterday. But he talked about the idea of the U.S. needing to more strictly impose sanctions on Iranian oil. And that kind of is one of the concerns, right? The flow of oil, not just from Iran, whether that supply could be restricted, but also what Iran may do in retaliation in the Strait of Hormuz. Can you just kind of walk us through what that could look like hypothetically?
No, I think that's a really good question. And again, we know that Iran has been watching this closely. No direct evidence of Iranian involvement yet, including coming from senior officials in Israel, from the White House. Biden just spoke to this, as did John Kirby earlier today. I think it remains to be seen the reaction there, and I think that will in large part drive Israel's reaction towards Iran. I think another key variable here is what happens to the frozen, then unfrozen funds.
That's $6 billion.
Exactly, which the White House has said earlier, made very clear that they could suspend that again if they felt the need to. There's clearly a deterrence effort here to try and prevent any other regional forces from trying to take advantage of the situation, which is why I think they made that threat clear and put it on the table, but still very much an evolving situation here.
So when we consider economic impact, your broad view then drives this through the oil market, right? Are we missing the ball somewhere else when it comes to consumer behavior, the impact on travel, for instance? Are there other areas of the economy that could be impacted by a conflict like this?
I think there's definitely other areas that can be affected. Obviously, Israel is also a major tech hub. There's a lot of other industries that run through this region. So I don't mean to simplify it just in terms of oil, but I do think that oil tends to be kind of the big marker in the region in terms of what people are looking for and when they're reacting to events in the region. That being said, I also think it's early days to go too far in saying that the rest of the supply chains in the region are going to shut down at this point. I think a huge part of this might be how long Israel can sustain Iron Dome and its defenses and make sure that the rest of its economy can continue to run as normal. Right now, I don't see any indication that that's under challenge. The U.S. is already sending resources towards Israel. There's a stockpile available in country that can help reinforce. But the duration of the conflict is going to be a key variable here. Obviously, Ukraine's been stretching global ammunition resources. The Defense Industrial Base is under strain as it is. So there's a question looming on the horizon of, if this extends much further, will there be enough resources to sustain those air defenses, allow their economy to function as normal?
Well, and just the question of, can additional resources go through the appropriate approval process in a timely manner, given what we're seeing in the legislative branch at the moment. President Biden, in part of the speech he just gave, said, "We will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens." So that speaks to kind of more of the economic element here, and defend itself. But is that something that can be guaranteed at this moment? How does what is happening on Capitol Hill make what the White House is trying to promise more difficult?
The current moment, the resources that are already on their way to Israel, so additional ammunition and other equipment to help sustain Iron Dome, DoD has made clear that they can send that with the current resources, and authorities don't need anything from Congress at the moment. At the same time, we're seeing the administration's clearly trying to keep Congress up to date, briefing members of Congress earlier today on the situation, and I think laying down a marker that that situation might evolve and that they want to have the ability to seek additional resources if needed. So yes, a real question looming on the horizon, the House discussion later tonight among Republicans on selecting a speaker candidate, the possible vote tomorrow, where that will land the House, and then obviously pushing an aid package through. I do think there tends to be broader bipartisan support for Israel.
Than say for Ukraine.
Exactly. And so the odds there, if they can get a speaker so that they can actually start pushing business through the House, I think the odds there are pretty good, but the first question, the prerequisite, is obviously they have to select a speaker.
God knows when that's going to happen. As we spent some time with Bloomberg's Jenny Welch, having just heard from President Biden, if you're just joining us, we did hear at last from the commander-in-chief on the situation in Israel following a conversation that he had with Benjamin Netanyahu. Here he is.
In this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Jenny Welch, you mentioned the DIB. I like that, the Defense Industrial Base. This is something we talked about with Mark Esper last hour, about the challenges in manufacturing a lot of weapons at once. If we are going to stand with Israel, as long as it takes, according to President Biden, much like we are with Ukraine, according to President Biden, will there need to be an executive order, an act of Congress, or something to start accelerating supply chains and manufacturing chains to this end?
There are a lot of options at the administration's disposal. There's things like the Defense Production Act, where the administration can kind of push defense companies to surge production of certain things, or even surge production of widgets that go into those things. Yeah. It really depends on kind of the package of materials that they're looking to increase production of. There's also obviously additional orders that can be put in that can help incentivize production. The challenge here is really the lead times that are often involved in weapons production. So a lot of times defense companies won't start a production line until they actually have a contract or order on hand. Then they'll invest the resources. So you kind of have to walk backwards from that point to determining where you're going to end up in the future. And that's been part of the challenge with Ukraine, is there has been such a relatively quick surge in terms of need, and it's hard for supply to catch up to that.
Of course, as Ukraine is engaged in this conflict with Russia, just as Israel is now engaged in conflict with Hamas, and we have heard Russia coming up in these conversations as well. We were just speaking at the top of this hour with retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was talking about Russia's influence on Iran. We heard Kevin McCarthy again at the Capitol yesterday talking about a new axis of evil being Iran, Russia, and China. Jenny, how much is this really about the Middle East, and how much of it is about these wider geopolitical dynamics?
I think you can't isolate the region from the wider geopolitical dynamics. I think that's a really good point. And China is walking headfirst into this with some of their recent comments in response to what's been happening over the weekend. I think from China's perspective, they are clearly trying to stay as neutral as possible while also recognizing that they have interest in the region and want to be more of a player in global geopolitics more broadly. I, at the same time, don't expect that they will play nearly as much of a direct role as the United States will be. Clearly, the U.S. is already engaged in the region, sending the carrier strike force right up there to support Israel, engaging with diplomatic partners all around the world to try and kind of rally around Israel. I think China's still kind of watching and waiting to see how things develop, but will want to at least have a voice in the discussion.
So much for being a peacemaker, huh? That was the conversation about China and Ukraine 6 months ago. We'll see how that goes this time. Jenny, I'm so glad you could come to talk to us. Many thanks for sharing your expertise. Bloomberg Economics Chief Geoeconomics Analyst. She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to be a regular on Bloomberg Sound On. I think Kaylee would agree. I'm Joe Matthew, along with Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Some final thoughts ahead. We've heard from President Biden now, and we are waiting to hear any information, any leaks or news that come from this caucus meeting in the Republican-led House in an effort to find a speaker. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. PepsiCo shares higher after earnings, up now by 1.9%. The stock getting a pop. PepsiCo says appetite-suppressing drugs have not affected sales of its snacks and sodas so far, though the company is focused on package size and consumers' portion control concerns as it aims to reach its raised annual forecast. PepsiCo did raise its earnings growth forecast. It also reported results that beat expectations. SL Green Realty says Andrew Mathias will be stepping down as president at the end of his employment agreement on December 31st. And with more on that story, here's Bloomberg's Erica Herskowitz.
Charlie, SL Green is New York's largest office landlord. Mathias joined the Real Estate Investment Trust in 1999. He will remain a member of the board and will serve in an advisory role to Chief Executive Officer Mark Holliday. New York office landlords have been pressured by rising vacancies and mounting costs since the pandemic spurred tenants to embrace hybrid work policies. Piper Sandler analyst Alexandra Goldfarb wrote in a note to clients the announcement of Mathias's departure was a surprise. Alexandra Goldfarb wrote in a note to clients the announcement of Mathias's departure was a surprise that shows the depth of this office upheaval. Charlie?
And that's Erica Herskowitz reporting. Birkenstock's IPO is expected to price later today after the trading day ends. It is the last of 4 big listings seen as pace setters for U.S. equity markets. We'll have those details as they become available. And those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
We'll have some final thoughts with Kaylee straight ahead after we bring you up to date on world and national news. For that, we turn to Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Nancy.
Thanks, Joe. Well, President Biden is condemning Hamas for carrying out a campaign of sheer evil against the Israelis. In a speech from the White House this afternoon, Biden reiterated the U.S. does stand with Israel.
Let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening.
Biden confirmed at least 14 American citizens are among the nearly 2,000 people dead. Biden says the U.S. will do everything it can to support Israel's fight. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has details on the U.S. aid that's making its way to Tel Aviv.
Officials in the defense industry and at the Pentagon tell Bloomberg News Boeing sped up deliveries of 1,000 smart bombs to Israel as it steps up retaliation against Hamas. We're told these 250-pound small-diameter bombs are part of a 2021 contract between Boeing and the Israeli government and are not part of a foreign military sale from the U.S. government. This contract was controversial when the Biden administration made Congress aware of it 2 years ago. Senator Bernie Sanders and some House members moved to block the sale in protest of Israeli attacks in Gaza at the time. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
The Republicans who want to be the next House Speaker, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, will be angling for their colleagues' approval today. War in Israel has added a new sense of urgency to their decision. They'll be addressing a closed GOP forum later today with the vote expected tomorrow. Former President Trump's New York civil fraud trial is in its 6th day. Former Trump Association Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg took to the witness stand in Manhattan to testify about the overinflated property valuations when he prepared Trump's financial statements. Michael Cohen, Trump's ex-lawyer and fixer, will also be testifying this week. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Joe and Kaylee.
All right, Nancy, thanks. We're just, 2 hours away now from the big showdown, the debate. Mm-hmm. Is it a debate? Maybe it's really more of a forum. A forum. Sounds less chippy.
More Greek-ish.
Sure. I thought you'd say Roman.
That's probably what I meant.
Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan together with the Republican conference, and not everybody gets along in that room.
Correct.
But we got a headline here on Kevin McCarthy. Do you believe this?
This is a report from Punchbowl that the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, has told House Republican lawmakers not to nominate him for Speaker.
This is a day after he said he'd leave it up to the conference.
Up to the conference, and yet you did have a few members of the conference coming out and say they wanted McCarthy. They were planning to back McCarthy unless McCarthy told them otherwise. So maybe, Joe, McCarthy is now telling them...
I'm telling you otherwise.
Otherwise, knowing that he or anyone else would need to get the majority votes that they need, and perhaps he doesn't think the math works for him.
Unless you really need me. Well, no. Producer Matt sends a note. Congressman Bob Good, this is Freedom Caucus, go ahead and shut it down. Don't fear the shutdown, Bob Good, said the next speaker should ideally not want the role. So this is the new method of campaigning, right? I don't want the role.
Yeah.
It was a week ago yesterday. A guy named Jim Jordan told us, I do not want to be speaker.
And
now
yet,
look at where we are.
He's one of the individuals speaking at the forum.
Yeah, come on.
At 5 p.m., along with, of course, Steve Scalise, who has been a longtime member of House leadership. And it seems, Joe, that every couple of minutes almost, we get a new endorsement for one of them. And yet when you have the columns lining up on either side...
Cut right down the middle.
That's not a majority.
217 is the magic number. They both have 100-something, and we don't know about the rest from there. But I'm just going to make it clear right now. I want you to know, Kaylee, I want everyone to know on the radio and on YouTube, I will not stand for Speaker of the House.
Foiled again. I was going to vote for you.
I had to get that off my chest. Okay, wow. Thanks to everyone for jumping in today. We had quite a 2-hour marathon, beginning, of course, with the great Kaylee Lyons. I'm Joe Matthew. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We are on YouTube and, of course, Bloomberg's streaming service, Bloomberg Originals. Carol Masser along with Tim Stenevec. It is Tuesday, Lemon. It's October 10th.
It's only Tuesday. We have kind of a funny week.
It's going to be a funny week because we're going to head out to the West Coast, but we're going to talk to you about that a little bit later on. Having said that, what we are all talking about is the trade today. For the most part, we've seen stocks to the upside, although we're off our best levels of the session. We have seen yields back off a little bit. Maybe a new narrative underway, maybe a new think about what the Fed does. We're going to dig into all of that.
Yeah, after those dovish Fed speakers yesterday moved markets
It's like a wedding. All the doves are like, fly, little birdie, fly.
Yeah, I mean, look, the narrative shifts week to week.
Did you have doves fly at the end of your wedding?
Not at our wedding. What about yours?
No, not at our wedding.
We missed the doves. Hey, you know what, Carol? We're going to continue our coverage. The big take today on a fractured Israel uniting around a singular event. We did just hear moments ago from President Biden, who weighed combining aid to both Israel and Ukraine.
Yeah, a lot going on. We're not going to move away from this story. Just like the war in Ukraine, we need to keep you up to date on what's going on. We're also going to get into, though, on the corporate side of things, Bob Iger's billion-dollar crisis that is, to some extent, putting his legacy on the line. It's a special issue of Bloomberg Business Week this week. But remember, we had Mr. Peltz yesterday buying more into that company, and he wants some changes.
He does. Hey, speaking of changes,
what
are we going to hear from big banks this week?
I don't know, but man, we've got J.P. Morgan, Citi, and Wells Fargo Friday the 13th.
Is it that time again already? It's earnings season?
Yep, it's not just about Halloween, Tim.
Okay, it's earnings season.
Speaking of that, we've got the CEO of Amalgamated Bank. We're going to get into what she is seeing when it comes to lending defaults and more the environment, and also what it's like to be a black woman in the financial sector. Because you know what? Heading up a bank, they're rare.
Hey, maybe you saw this alert cross on your phone just a couple hours ago. Quote, he directed me to commit these crimes. Those are the words of on-again, off-again girlfriend and former head of the sister hedge fund to FTX, Caroline Ellison, talking about none other than SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried. We're going to have the latest on the fraud trial against SBF.
Yep, and for those watching on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals, you will see the perp walk. No, it's not a perp walk.
Yeah.
It's
no, you can't.
I can't call it that, but it's
such a New York thing.
It was a walk. Yeah, she was actually walking in to testify. All right, and then we're going to get into what every entrepreneur needs to know from the likes of entrepreneurs who had all of them, I should say, had one thing in common. So we're going to get into what that is and what they created. Having said that, we're going to focus now on the markets. Head over to our TV colleagues, Romaine Bostick and Katie Greifeld, because we're going to talk about the trade. That's because Countdown to the Close starts now.
countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostick alongside Katie Greifeld. We're joined right now by our colleagues, Carol the Queen Masser and Tim Stenovic. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms, television, radio, originals, and YouTube. Carol Masser, how are you?
I'm doing
Your
well.
Majesty.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you, sire. Having said that, consumers, and at least their household balance sheets, seem to be doing just fine. Consumers, we know we talk about this, right, guys, all the time, how important consumer spending is to the U.S. economy specifically. We've talked a lot about the paring back of the balance sheets, household balance sheets, especially those at the lower income strata, if you will. Having said that, maybe that's not the case because based on some government data, when it comes to household savings, Tim, maybe things aren't so bleak.
Wait a second. I thought just a few weeks ago we got this
minute.
report that said all this excess savings.
Be careful, Tim.
Whoa.
Very
Bloomberg After Dark all of a sudden.
Safe for work. Excess savings. I thought all that dried up. I don't know what's going on
I was
here.
confused
You got to
by this
look at the
too.
revised data.
I guess that's the point of being data-driven, Katie Greifeld. You can just cherry-pick whatever data you want.
No, well, to be fair, government data that's saying that there's more money in household savings, right? And so now economists are going back and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe household balance sheets aren't so bad.
I do want to say it's not.
But where is the money?
I want to say it's not all good news. Where's the money?
Money
Is a good question.
markets? In money
It's
markets?
with the wealthiest Americans.
No, but I mean, like,
the
they
issue.
keep saying there's more money than we thought. But where is that extra cash stashed away?
It's under the mattress.
If you're a fan of Arrested Development, it's in the banana stand.
In the banana stand. Well, you know, when we think about all these conflicting data sets that we're getting on excess savings, Tim, that's how you pronounce it.
Thank you.
I figure it'll show up in the official inflation data sooner or later, which brings me to the International Monetary Fund. This was interesting. They put out their projection for CPI across the world for the next year. They've actually boosted their projection to 5.8%. That is up from 5.2% from 3 months ago. And basically, it's calling central banks to remain vigilant on inflation risks, which kind of goes against what at least we're seeing in pricing for the Fed, with bond markets pretty much saying that the Fed is done.
Yeah, this was kind of fascinating. I mean, I guess, the IMF always puts out these forecasts ahead of these meetings here. And I guess if you do believe here that we are going to stay above that longer-term trend here, then yeah, it makes the case that central banks need to stay put. But, I mean, the elephant in the room is that a lot of central banks have already flipped the script. So it's a little confusing as to why they would make that statement that they should hold fast.
Yeah, I don't know. How's that for something intelligent? Not really. No, I just think I'm also just kind of waiting for all of the global central bank policy to really kick in. We keep talking about lag effect and so on and so forth here in the United States specifically, and that we're kind of seeing it, or we've seen the impact on some sectors already. I don't know. I guess it all just depends on whether or not we have a more significant slowdown. But watch those spending patterns, whether it was Golden Week in China or whether we look at the inflation data here in the U.S. and spending data, we'll get an idea of whether or not inflation is more stickier global-wide.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder, too, that inflation's not just an issue here in the U.S. This is an issue, Romaine, that the entire world, the developed world, has certainly been dealing with over the past couple of years in the wake of all the government spending during the pandemic. So look, I mean, higher for longer is what we hear from the Fed. Higher for longer is what we hear from, the IMF also.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, we go back to sort of Katie talking about the CPI and PPI reports that we get over the next 36, 48 hours here. And I think we're going to see a ratification that, yeah, we're nowhere near that 2% target, no matter what you're looking at, whether it's core, super core, or, I don't know.
Super duper core?
I don't know.
That's a new one.
Special core?
So it's just more of the same. Right?
Tim's got a lot of jokes today.
Yeah.
Excess savings. Yeah. I'll practice that one. Get back to you guys later in the program.
He got a really good night's sleep from what I hear.
Finally.
That's what's going on.
Okay.
All right. We're going to be back in less than an hour's time. We're going to count you down to the close on this Tuesday, radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. We do it all. Join us, though, at 4 p.m. Wall Street time for Beyond the Bell. All right, we are trying every day to figure out kind of where we go from here. Definitely a significant trade, or maybe a bit of a new narrative today. We had stocks higher, although as we've been talking about, off our best levels of the session. Treasury yields backing off, those comments from Fed officials bolstering some speculation about the central bank heading toward another pause in interest rates. Although as we just talked with our TV colleagues, this whole idea of higher for longer globally.
Yeah, it's sort of like, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter a hike versus holding at this point.
Yeah.
25 basis points, given where we are at the federal funds rate. And it's all about how long they're going to keep rates high.
Yeah.
And, we're not talking about cuts this year like we were just a few months ago.
No, exactly, right? Speaking of narratives changing in a big way. We did have today Fed Bank of Atlanta President Raphael Bostic saying policy is restrictive enough, though, to bring inflation back to their 2% goal. Time will tell. With more, Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist Ira Jersey joining us from our Princeton, New Jersey Bureau. And also with us is Jess Metton, Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities here in our Interactive Brokers studio. Ira, I want to start with you. Bond market yesterday, the cash trade was closed because of the holiday. So we're getting, an interesting day where I guess you could say U.S. Treasuries really get to react a little bit to maybe some of the tensions, obviously, and the attack in Israel, but also some of the Fed speak and the think about rates from here and where they go. What do you think about the trade today and what you're seeing?
Yeah, so most of the trade today was really a follow-on from yesterday. So futures were open yesterday, and Treasury futures rallied pretty significantly. So a big part of this move is catch-up. But you were right. Some of the Fed speak we got today was a little bit more on I'm not going to say the dovish side, but less hawkish, right? And I think that that's an important distinction that we have to take away from some of these moves. So you saw that, a pretty decent rally. The other thing that I think we have to be aware of is we were very oversold. So when you look at a lot of technical indicators, when you think about how many people were kind of still long the market, even though we sold off, there were a lot of things kind of set up for at least some kind of profit-taking, short covering rally like we're seeing. I think ultimately, though, the data we get the next couple of days is going to be absolutely key. And keep in mind, we're talking about the CPI data and the PPI, but we also get the Fed minutes tomorrow. And I think that there could be some nuance in there that could give us an idea of really how deep this idea that we can be on hold for 12 to 18 months is and how pervasive that is throughout all of the FOMC.
That's going to be painful, man. But go ahead, Tim. I know you have a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to get Ira on the record here. Is that it, Ira?
Raise your right hand, Ira, and say.
Did rates peak for this cycle? Was that it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that they were going to peak at 435. So what do I know? But I think at the end of the day, we're nearing the end of the rate rise, and I think we think about what would it take for the long end of the yield curve, so the 10-year note and a 30-year bond. What would it take for those yields to move significantly higher from here? And it would have to be, in my view, a turnaround in inflation and inflation expectations. There's a lot of people talking about the supply story and the fact that we are going to continue to have some reasonably high deficits. But we've known that now for almost 3 months. So that should be priced in the market. And if it's not, there's some big issues. That being said, we had a horrible 3-year auction just about 2 hours ago. And, it was actually probably the worst 3-year auction that we've had in well over a year. So there is this question as to who's going to be buying all of this supply. So, yes, maybe we've seen the peak in rates, but it doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily see as big of a rally as we would if the supply-demand dynamics were a little bit more in balance.
Right.
Higher for longer.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's
and I will
thinking.
say, Ira's been warning about all this supply, but I think especially on the shorter end of the yield curve, but all this new supply coming in. Jess, come on in, though, on the conversation in terms of the equity trade today. Is there a feeling, kind of a resolution maybe among equity investors, equity traders, that we are getting to the peak in rates?
That is something that has come up, especially as you've begun to see yields easing. But then also there's a couple other different factors because you do have the dollar on pace for its 5th consecutive day of losses. So it's been on a real tear over the past 2 months. So this would be its longest losing streak since July. But then you have oil coming down just slightly below, if you're looking at WTI in the U.S., below $86 a barrel.
So weaker dollar beneficial to global companies?
Correct.
In terms of selling overseas?
Multinational companies. It's basically more than a third of the S&P 500. So it's clearly come off its peak when you look at the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index from a year ago, but obviously over the past couple of months gained some strength again, some of that being in part because we did see the Federal Reserve raise rates over the summer once again. But when you have those three factors easing a little bit, and then also what that translate into, especially with given some of the tensions in the Middle East, that adds to those concerns already with the tensions between, say, the U.S. and China. You still have everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, and so that kind of adds another factor there to where that could potentially mean that the Fed does not potentially hike rates again. This is something that Deutsche Bank actually had a note, their economist earlier today, thinking that Of course, when you have this sort of a recession debate at these Wall Street firms, sort of pushing it out to the first half of next year, but they're thinking this sort of adds another layer to the complexity of that. So then when you have those factors, do you rejigger the rate cut conversation that Tim was talking about at the beginning of this segment?
It does feel like narrative. What is the right narrative going forward, or whether or not they're backing off kind of more rate increases. Having said that, Ira, there are a couple of things, and we're going to come back to Jess because bank earnings are certainly on our radar, but so too are the inflation prints this week, and of course the Fed speak, and of course the FOMC minutes. Give us an idea of maybe, I don't know, I'm a nut with yellow stickies. They're all over my computer. I'm like, remember this for this day, this day.
I don't know how you see anything on your monitor because your entire monitor is covered with these sticky notes.
It's a problem, no doubt about it. But I'm just curious, what would be the yellow stickies that you have up on your computer about some of those important, points that the Treasury trades certainly might impact or might trade on?
Yeah, so CPI is going to be much more important than PPI, especially for the bond markets. And I think I'm looking for, if we get something like another 0.2 print on headline CPI, then that's going to be a reasonably benign number for the market, and we are probably set up to continue the rally that we've seen the last couple of days. Conversely, obviously, you get a higher number, you probably get yields that back up a little bit here. And going back to those minutes again, the minutes themselves, I think, typically they're not very market moving unless there's a shocking kind of revelation in there, and I don't think that that's going to happen. But the nuance in there could give us a hint as to the how long piece that we've been talking about. Like what does some time mean? Now they're not going to be direct in there, but they're going to say longer than previous cycles, for example, might be something that's said, which would imply for longer than a year that they would maintain rates where they are, which has implications for some parts of the curve, like the 3-year that I think people are worried about owning if the Fed's going to be on hold for 18 months.
Tim, this reminds me as I'm listening to Ira, like we were having a conversation. I'm not going to say, but your son asked you a question. I'm not going to go there, but it's like a kid asking a question. So, Mommy, Daddy, what does sometime mean? Like, I want to ask that of Jay Powell.
But I think you bring up a really good point because, remember the last time we saw a surprise rate cut? We talked about this yesterday. I remember where I was.
Pandemic.
It was a Sunday during the pandemic, right? And everyone was concerned about what was happening. And we just don't know what's coming. And I think that's what makes this so difficult.
We do know that bank earnings are coming, and I feel like that's going to help us a little bit. So, Jess, what's on your radar here?
Well, obviously, you have J.P. Morgan, Citi, and others like Wells Fargo reporting on Friday, and clearly the pain there is more when you're thinking about still what's happening with the regional banks. So the discussion about deposits, right? We were having so much of that a few months ago, but that sort of has dried up. So it's clearly honing in on that. But then also from a technical perspective.
So what do we want to know from the big banks in terms of deposits?
Well, basically, especially on the regional side, that we're not seeing what we would have seen, say, back in March, where there are those deposit concerns where people are fleeing. And that's not necessarily expected, but from the bigger banks, especially the C-suite executives, obviously Jamie Dimon, Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, what are they saying about the direction of the economy, especially Bank of America, the tell when it comes to the American consumer and those spending trends? That's going to be key, in addition to obviously when it comes to what's happening on their trading desks and what that tells you about the economy as well. But then also from a technical perspective, you look at the XLF on the within the index. If you're looking at financials in the S&P 500, that's tracking that particular sector, but it's at a key threshold where if you look back, it's testing its pre-crisis highs in 2007 as well as right before COVID in March of 2020. So that has actually served as support over the past few years, as well as for small caps that's been tracking that. So that's something that potentially you see some buyers come back in.
Ira, is there anything among the banks that you care about in terms of maybe fixed income trading? And just got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, a few things. Firstly, I think bank deposit flight is something that people are worried about. In fact, anecdotally, my depository institution just told me that they're raising their interest rate from basically 0 to 4%. So, there are people who are worried about that. Yeah, and from a trading perspective, some of these regulations that are coming in, I'm interested in hearing what they say on their earnings calls about the coming regulations and the more regulation that they're going to have, and how that might change their operations, including will they have to hold more treasuries in order to comply comply with some of the new rules.
All right, good stuff, guys. Thank you so much. So appreciate it. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist Ira Jersey joining us there in Princeton, and Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities, Jess Metton, right here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Check her out on Twitter, X, at Jessica Metton. And, of course, Ira, if you're on the terminal, you can read his incredible research. I'm Carol Massar, along with Tim Stanovic. Don't you love it when kids ask questions?
I do.
Tell
Yeah,
me.
you don't have to keep it a secret. Maybe we can talk about it later.
Maybe we talk about it later. It was very sweet.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. This update is brought to you by Glen Mead. Glen Mead offers sophisticated wealth and investment management solutions combined with the personalized service you deserve. Your wealth, your mission, your investments. Let's talk. Visit glenmead.com to learn more. Stocks rose, Treasury yields fell after comments from Fed officials bolstered speculation that the central bank is heading toward another pause in rate hikes. Oil edging lower following its biggest rally since April. We begin with crude oil and West Texas Intermediate crude right now is down, little change, down by about 50 cents to 85.86 a barrel. We've got Brent, the global benchmark, at 87.56 a barrel, down 0.7%. 10-year yield 4.66%, with the 2-year at 4.98%. Worth repeating on the 2-year there, 4.98%. S&P up 25, a gain of 0.6%. Dow up 138, up 0.4. NASDAQ up 97, higher by 0.7%. So what about the economic outlook for the fourth quarter and what it may mean for markets? Stephanie Guild is head of investment strategy at Robinhood Financial, and she was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Markets.
I do think we're going into a mild recession next year. I think this quarter will be fine, and I think earnings will kind of bring us, bounce the markets up. I don't think we're going to get above this year's highs, which is around 4,600 on the S&P.
And right now, the S&P at 43.61. Again, you can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Markets podcast. Earnings this morning from PepsiCo, the stock now up by 1.9%. Rival Coca-Cola is up 2.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. It is day 4, heading into day 5 since the surprise Hamas attack on Israel. And in today's Bloomberg Big Take, Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief, who we talked to yesterday, Ethan Bronner, writes about a nation in which political divisions have really driven anti-government protesters into the streets for 9 months. That's been the backdrop ahead of this, and that those divisions have now vanished in the face of Hamas's slaughter at the weekend and fears that the conflict could spread to Lebanon. We see this, right, Tim? Often tough times, conflict can often bring divided sides together.
The question is, I think, how long this lasts, especially in a government that has been so divided for such a long time. With more on how the nation has come together and yet the risks that still face its politically challenged and questioned Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we've got Bloomberg News economy and government reporter Galit Altstein joining us on Zoom from Tel Aviv right now. Galit, good to have you with us. First of all, I just want to say thanks for joining us, especially so late and in a time that people are so concerned about their security in Tel Aviv. Just give us an idea of what you're experiencing right now, what you're seeing, and really what you're doing.
So if you're asking me on a personal note,
yes.
So actually, Tel Aviv has also been targeted over the past 4 days. I live in a very northern vicinity of Tel Aviv, so I think it's a little less targeted than other parts of the city. But we did have 2 missile alerts today. Had to go down to the bomb shelter. It is now around 10:30 p.m. here, so they were saying on the news a bit earlier that missiles were expected to be shot at Tel Aviv at 9 p.m. That didn't happen up till now, but some people are still, waiting to see if that happens. And that's basically what's going on the ground here in Tel Aviv.
Galit, is it to the point where the missiles are coming and they're being intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system?
So yes, hopefully so. It is, as you probably well know, this is a very efficient system that Israel has, made up and built and has made operational, but it does, miss sometimes. So, but most of the times it's pretty accurate, and it does an amazing job at intercepting the missiles. Yes.
In covering it yesterday here, certainly at Bloomberg and during our live broadcast, were some of the headlines that came out of Benjamin Netanyahu's evening televised address, the Prime Minister, of course, and talking about unifying government. Tell us remind our world about the backdrop that's been Israel for the last 9 or 10 months.
Yeah. So Benjamin Netanyahu, who's Israel's longest ever reigning prime minister, came back to power at the very end of last year, at the very end of December last year, and he put together a governing coalition that is constituted of very far-right nationalist parties and Orthodox parties, Jewish Orthodox parties, making that I think you can say that is like the most, some would say, the most right-leaning government Israel has ever had. Some would say it is the most extreme government that Israel has ever had. And on that backdrop, right after the government was formed, Justice Minister Yariv Levin, who was a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's party, the Likud, came out and put out an announcement that he's initiating a judicial overhaul, which was basically meant to weaken the power of courts, mainly the Supreme Court, Israel's Supreme Court. And that immediately brought on very intense public protests that went on until last Saturday. So it went on for 40 weeks straight. It got bigger and bigger as time went by and as the weeks went on. And it turned out to be the biggest protest movement that Israel had ever seen. Mm-hmm. And the division was very, very big. And, it was felt everywhere because I think that in my perception, and I think many would tell you that at some point it went way beyond the controversial judicial overhaul, which is always at the foundation of things. But, it was a very big opposition to Netanyahu's government because a lot of other things that they were trying to pass through in parliament and in other ways that a big part of the public very much resented here.
And it's safe to say his political future was much in question. Now, as he seeks a more unified government, and you understand why everyone would be rallying, behind unification, or at least everybody kind of on the same mission, if you will, in terms of any kind of retaliation. Does it change the political course of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think so. There's been a lot of talk that's being pushed back both by Israeli officials, Israeli politicians, leaders, and also by some, people in the general public. So there's been a big pushback, on the questions of, how this even happened, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing that it even happened to a country like Israel.
Is he being held responsible for that? What's the conversations that you are hearing there in Israel about his responsibility for missing on the intelligence side of things?
So, some people are saying that he has a big part in it. Obviously, most people think that there was, an intelligence failure here. But there is talk about, first of all, him being responsible for everything that goes on as prime minister. And also that pressure that the government had put, for instance, to shift military powers from the Gaza area to the West Bank, for instance, to secure settlements, especially during the Jewish holidays that they were just, coming to an end just last Saturday. So they're also saying, so it's not just his overall responsibility for the situation, but actually, some things that were brought on by his government, by their policies, by, how much they wanted to go towards the settlements, and allow them to do things in the West Bank that needed a lot of security. So yes, he is being blamed for this.
So I just want to clarify. Are you saying instead of focusing on the border with Gaza, potentially moving resources from that area to the West Bank?
Yes, that is part of the conversation here in Israel. I want to be clear that it is not 100% of the conversation. Not everyone is saying this, and even the people who are saying this, are not saying that this is 100% he's 100% to be blamed for what happened. But there is talk about the specific point that I was just talking about, that because they wanted to allow settlers in Judea and Samaria to have all these ceremonies and all these events during the Jewish holiday season. They did move some military powers. They did shift them to the West Bank, and this left Gaza a little bare as in relevance to what is usually over there in terms of military powers.
Just got about a minute or so left, 45 seconds. Galit, I can't even imagine, to be in your shoes. What are you thinking at this point as you look out towards the rest of the week?
Well, if you listen to the rhetoric of everyone, who's been speaking to us leaders, IDF officials, they're speaking about a very, very long military operation that's coming ahead. And there's a big question if Lebanon will be joining, Hezbollah in Lebanon will be joining in. And this is causing a lot of concern. I'm speaking now, of the civilians, of the general public in Israel, because, when there is a war in Israel, then the public is targeted by missiles. And when you look at Hezbollah, they're a much bigger threat in that sense than Hamas. People are concerned, and it's pretty clear that we're looking at something that's going to be very long, ongoing, weeks, maybe months, and we have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and this is something we talked about yesterday. What I think somebody referred to it as Iranian proxies. Was it Lebanon and some other areas? In terms of as this size and scope may expand out. Galit, stay safe, and thank you so much. Galit Altstein on Zoom from Tel Aviv, of course, Bloomberg News economy and government reporter.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden says the U.S. does stand with Israel following the multi-pronged attack launched by Hamas this weekend.
This is an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered. Not just killed, slaughtered in Israel. Among them, at least 14 American citizens killed.
Biden says he spoke earlier today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and heard of stories of torture inflicted on innocent civilians, even babies. Biden says he has directed his team to share intelligence and military experts to consult and advise the Israelis. And he says the U.S. has already begun delivering critical needed munitions and military equipment to Tel Aviv. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be traveling to Israel this week in a show of diplomatic support. The high-level visit is a relatively fast trip by the top U.S. diplomat after the outbreak of a conflict. Republican lawmakers will be meeting behind closed doors later this afternoon to hear from the two candidates who could replace Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. It's unclear if Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan have the support needed to win the Speaker election, which is set for tomorrow. Well, after ruling out running for president in 2024, former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan now signals he's leaving the door open to pursue the Republican nomination. He says he'll see how things look next spring. Hogan spoke about his plans in an interview on Bloomberg Television.
I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm not walking away, and I'm not willing to give up.
Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan is one of the most vocal Republican critics of former President Trump. Carrie Lake, who ran for governor of Arizona and lost, is now setting her sights on the U.S. Senate. She's expected to announce her campaign at a rally tonight. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
Connection lost.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks higher, oil lower. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks with a bid, but off their session highs. Dow still up 141 points. S&P's gained 26, and NASDAQ rises by 99 points. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.66%. Gold is down 2, oil trading in the red, and Bitcoin is off by 0.7%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, all were trading in the green, led by gains in utilities and materials. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Boeing and Coca-Cola, while travelers and UNH led to the downside. Regarding earnings this morning, Pepsi beat estimates, and over in Europe, LVMH sales growth softened in the third quarter. Wrapping things up, Google hit a fresh 52-week high. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUAK, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, how many of you are tempted to just crawl into bed, then come back and wake up in about 3 or 4 months?
Are you asking me? Hibernate?
Are you?
Want me to hibernate?
Hibernate and then come back
You know,
and
I've
then
always
deal with
wanted to
the
hibernate.
markets of 3 or 4 months from now.
Fine. Sign me up.
Why does that,
that
not
possible?
surprise me?
You know how I roll.
All right, well, let's see how our next guest rolls. Doug Sioka is back with us, CEO and partner at Kavar Capital on Zoom in Leawood, Kansas. Doug, so good to have you back with us. There's a lot going on geopolitically, as you know, and we've been covering, but a lot coming at investors just generally speaking. Having said that, what do you think if we all went to bed and then came back in 3 or 4 months, did the hibernation thing? Well, actually, that would be more like 5 or 6 months. What kind of environment might we have in 4 months or 6 months from now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for having me back on. I think we would have an environment that we'd missed a lot of fantastic opportunities. I think, like you kind of mentioned, there's been a lot of negativity. Obviously, the emotional weight of what transpired in Israel over the weekend is heavily on everyone's hearts and minds. And, the markets historically don't really know how to calibrate prospects of geopolitical escalation, right? There are knee-jerk reactions into havens and out of risk. But then there's the realization that conflict galvanizes government interventions, and that could be a net increase in capital and liquidity. And so it's kind of an emotional tension between, I should say, it's sort of a tension point between emotion and economic. And that kind of defines what the market's been, but for various reasons throughout the year, no question.
I like that combination between emotion and economic. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, so where are we right now? Because it seems like it's less emotional, at least today, in terms of what's driving the market. Because it seems like it's sort of maybe it is emotional, but maybe it's just dovish.
Yeah, I think, Tim, you could say, well, today's the Raphael Bostic or Philip Jefferson rally.
Yeah.
Maybe we give a little attribution to Mary Daly because her acknowledgement of rate sufficiency was a bit more of a reversal than the others.
And because our Lisa Abramowitz did the most amazing conversation with her at the New York Economic Club. I have to just put a shout out for Lisa because it was pretty amazing. But anyway, go ahead.
Well deserved. Agree. Yeah. And then throw on top of that, last night you have elevated Chinese stimulus. And then I saw something interesting this morning from Bespoke and talking about the dollar has been in a bit of a decline over the last couple of weeks, and even in spite of the haven demand that emanated over the weekend. So today's a pretty good day, particularly when you consider that the equal-weighted S&P is outperforming the market cap weighted by about 30 basis points for those that are concerned about an absence of breath. And no doubt, this 4,200 level in the S&P has held pretty solidly since last week.
Yeah, just Benton was talking about a weaker dollar, too, impacting the trade.
So, Doug, do you think, it's hard to, even look back on the declines we saw last week and then see the surge we saw this week. I'm wondering if we're going to test those lows again, not just the lows from last week, but last October this cycle.
It's a great question. It's interesting, Tim. The pessimists have been spewing this pretty well-worn narrative, right? expect these persistently high interest rates to, number one, decelerate the economy, number two, undermine consumer confidence, number three, re-rate market multiples, and then lastly, shift capital to more conservative corners. And all of that makes sense, right? And I also have said for a while, I don't know that the market is getting credit for time served last year, right? Yes, we've had a nice bounce. We're still not taking out the prior period highs, right? Even though we've had the bounce in the 1-year anniversary a couple of days ago of those lows. But historically, right, when you just look at where we are at current real yields, it's actually a coin toss between stock and bond performance looking out 12 months. Both are positive. Again, this is historically, not predictive, just perspective. But inflation has come down a bunch off the peak. And this is what we know. And I read this from Goldman Sachs last week. Since 1945, the S&P has risen 21% on average in the 2 years after the recent data showing a peak in CPI. If you take out episodes with a recession, that means you're looking at more like a 28% gain over that 2-year period. So I do think because the wall of worry is so steep, a lot of that is reflected in valuations, and there's some pretty attractive places to put money right now, and there's some pretty important inflection points that are building.
So when you say market getting credit for time served, you're talking equity market specifically?
And fixed income, right, Carol? Because you figure last year was what, the 7th worst year in the history of stocks, the 1st worst year in the history of bonds. It was the single worst year for bonds, the single worst 3-year period of bonds, 7, 5, and 10-year period of bonds. I don't know why I said those in out of chronological order. Right. But so there was a lot of time served, a lot of unwind, a lot of slack and excess left both markets, which needed to happen, right? There was just so much liquidity that has now come out of the market, and it's still coming out of the market. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing the back end of the curve rising as it has.
So in other words, both stocks and bonds have gotten the heck beaten out of them. And so let's remember that in terms of when we look at the trade today.
Absolutely. That's a much better and more concise way to say that.
Well, I could have used another 4-letter word, but, you know, we are Bloomberg, and I like to keep it clean. Anyway, but that's a really good point. So having said that, it's an interesting week, Doug, with bank earnings, and we're looking for a lot of guidance and understanding of kind of where we go from here from the big bank CEOs who can tell us a lot, right, about the lending environment, and especially when you've got the Fed concerned about tightening financial conditions. That's why I think what we get from the banks is even more important. But you've also got some Fed minutes and those inflation prints. Is this potentially a very important week for you and maybe how you think about the market and where it goes from here, or what?
You know, I think every piece is incremental, right? What we've had this obsession with, and likely because it's been, you know, big center point of the media, but then also fielding questions from our clients is there a chance for a soft landing? And to your point, Carol, we're going to get some aspects of that case that can be affirmative or counter. And we think there's a chance for a soft landing. But if you really think about, we have stable to accelerating economic growth. Do you realize that the GDP now at the Atlanta Fed rate is projecting a 3rd quarter GDP of 4.9%?
Do you believe it?
So we have stable to accelerating GDP. Say that again, Tim, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I mean, they have a pretty good track record.
They do have a pretty good track record, right? And you have stable to falling CPI and PCE. And we saw on last Friday, this ridiculously strong headline NFP number, but also a significant drop in its drop of average hourly earnings. So you've got an economy that's resilient, a consumer that's still spending, even though they've lost some leverage in salary negotiations, which we saw in the quits rate as well, which is actually okay, is some of the stuff that they're buying is dropping in price. Right,
okay,
as for that CPI plummet.
So stable or accelerating growth, a consumer who's still spending. What else is on the team soft landing? Yeah, what else is on team soft landing?
Well, and you got to consider the consumer so importantly because it's 68% of GDP is wrapped up in consumers' contribution. So you still have the strong employment pick that I mentioned. You have low leverage as a percentage of household net worth. And then this is really fascinating. Article in Wall Street Journal over the weekend talked about the shifting and the burden of purchasing from the younger to the older cohort in this country. And I didn't realize that people age 65 and up spend 22% of all the dollars in this country annually. That's up from 15% in 2010. And Americans age 70 and higher control 26% of the household wealth. So you have this cohort of people that is also going through this emotional catharsis of, you know what, we went through the pandemic. You know what, life can be short. You know what, I'm going to spend.
Right.
We've seen 5 to 7% elevation in that spending.
I got family members who are doing that and traveling and doing all that kind of things. Doug Sioka, thank you so much of Kavar Capital. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. General Motors shares up by 1.7%. GM did reach a contract with its Canadian union, ending a strike that began about 13 hours earlier at 3 plants in Ontario. Now, that agreement will increase base hourly wages by almost 20% for production workers and 25% for skilled trades. The deal also increases starting pay for temporary part-time workers, and it boosts pensions. So GM up 1.7% right now. Rival Ford up 1.2%. Stellantis higher by 2.5%. PepsiCo raised its earnings growth forecast and reported results this morning that beat expectations as consumers absorbed higher prices on the company's snacks and beverages. Ken Shea is a senior analyst for beverages, tobacco, and cannabis with Bloomberg Intelligence.
They lifted their outlook for core EPS, adjusted for currency, up a little bit. And they even went out, unusual for them, and looked out to 24. And didn't give a lot of detail, but they said that, their long-term algorithm, which is mid-single-digit revenue and high single-digit EPS growth, looked like it was going to hit the high end of those ranges.
And you can hear more of the conversation with Ken Shea on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Shares of PepsiCo, they're up 1.9%. Rival Coca-Cola higher now by 2.2%. And those are some of our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just about 4.5 minutes. And Tim and I are going to go over to our TV colleagues, Romaine and Scarlett, talk about the trade today. You know, when we were talking to Doug Sioka, I was looking at what he said. I love what he said, the market not getting credit for their time served, whether it's both the equity or stock trade. And I looked at, we have seen stocks and bonds really come under a lot of pressure. And then I looked at the rally from October of last year until about July of this year, and we were up 24% on the S&P 500. So we had quite a bounce back. But he's right, you got to kind of have to put it into perspective of kind of where we are coming from to some extent, especially, some of the beaten up.
Well, and I think, September and the early, part of this month were a little bit frightening to people. Yeah, a little bit of smackdown. I think that's a good way to describe it. Yeah. With the bond market and with the equity market.
Exactly. So just a little bit of smart perspective there. Just looking at some of the stories that are certainly catching our attention. As you know, we are keeping a watch, all of us here at Bloomberg, on the attack on Israel. Having said that, Boeing accelerating delivery of 1,000 smart bombs to Israel as the country steps up retaliation against Hamas after that weekend attack. So we're talking about 250-pound small diameter bombs. It's part of a 2021 contract. They were flown from an Air Force base in the U.S. by Israeli Air Force Transport, according to an industry official who asked not to be identified.
Yeah, a senior defense official who spoke to reporters Monday said that the munitions being rushed to Israel weren't part of a foreign military sale between governments, but rather was part of a direct commercial sale between the contractor and Israel that was already on the books. We should note a second defense official said Tuesday that the first official was referring to expedited transactions. That's under a May 2021 direct commercial sale between Boeing and Israel, when the State Department valued at $735 million over several years.
I always think about defense, generally speaking, and it was always like, okay, it's all about Republicans who are in on the big defense spend, but we are living in a world and environment where increasingly all nations are increasing, it feels like, their defense budgets. And you see certainly the U.S. assistance, whether it's Israel, whether it's Ukraine. But it's just interesting. We certainly saw the defense sector rally off of the news over the weekend. But it's just a reminder of what a massive global industry it is.
Citi actually came out with a note today that said even with yesterday's rally, defense stocks still attractive.
Yeah, right? So
it's a business story, too.
Absolutely. News story, business story, investment story, and we're all on it. Hey, right now we're going to take you down to the close, Beyond the Bell. It starts right now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast, joined now by royalty. Carol Massar and her subject, Tim Stenovich, bringing together our Bloomberg audiences across television, radio.
I was just going to say, he's the
YouTube.
court jester, actually.
Oh, okay. Are you moving up in the
Did
world?
you ever see him juggle balls? Good at it.
Oh, yeah.
He juggles a lot of things. All right, the market's also juggling a lot of things. Definitely seeing, though, a bit of a break, it feels like. Equity to the upside. Did you like what I did there?
Yeah, she's the queen of transitions, truly. No question.
Segue queen. Having said
That's what
that,
I'm laughing at.
yeah. Oh wait, are you laughing at? Are
No.
you laughing at? Are you laughing at me?
No.
Are you? Okay.
Never.
All right. I'm looking at solar stocks, guys. Have you looked at the Invesco Solar ETF? It's up about 6% in today's session. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the names on the move, but France announcing plans to boost solar power capacity in the country, and so it looks like that sector is certainly getting a boost in today's trade.
Hey, we just had a great chat with Doug Sioka. We check in with him quite a bit over at Kavar Capital Partners. He talked to us about being on Team Soft Landing these days.
Really?
Yeah, he spoke about stable or accelerating growth here in the U.S. The consumer is still spending, even though the consumer has lost some of that leverage when it comes to, looking for jobs and lost the upper hand to companies that are doing the hiring right now. Household net worth is solid. He's thinking things are looking pretty good.
He loves that GDP Now number for the fourth quarter.
I mean, everyone loves that GDP Now at the Atlanta Feds, yeah.
I wonder if we could, there's a team no landing at this point because the data has continued to exceed expectations.
Yeah. Okay, let's walk through the numbers here.
You left him speechless, Scarlett.
On this Tuesday afternoon here. Green across the screen here with the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ, both all up for a third straight day here. The Dow Jones Industrial Average higher by more than 100 points, or about 0.4%. The S&P 500 going to close higher by more than 20 points, or 0.5%. A 0.6% gain for the NASDAQ composite. And your outperformer on the day, actually the Russell 2000, putting together a fifth straight day of gains right now, 1.1% here on the day.
All right, digging a little bit deeper into the S&P 500, as I like to do. 384 names, Scarlett, to the upside, 117 losing ground today, and then 2 unchanged.
And that's kind of mirrored in the sector breakdown in the S&P 500 as well. 24 groups, 20 of them are in the green, led by autos, banks, and utilities. Of course, banks will be reporting earnings at the end of the week. And then on the flip side, you've got tech hardware, insurance, and software. So some of the big tech names, at least nominally in the red, in that the sectors are not positive today.
All right, so let's get to some of the individual gainers. Who does not like Fritos?
I don't, but go ahead.
Oh, you're the only one.
Wow, how could you not like Fritos?
Fritos? No, God.
They're
all right,
good.
they're really
He
good.
likes other snacks.
on the tier of snacks, that's literally like towards the bottom.
All right, we got to
It's
work
like
on you.
it's like Fritos and those Necco wafers.
Oh my gosh, Fritos are so good. All
I
right.
agree with you about those wafers.
Well, the maker of Fritos and Doritos and Tostitos is up about 1.9.
Tostitos, I can go for it.
I'm glad to know you like something in their array of products, if you will. Up 1.9% in today's session. The company coming out and boosting their forecast for sales, and they said basically, right, we've heard from Walmart, we've heard from the maker of Pringles saying, those weight loss drugs, Ozempic, Wegovy, well, that's impacting what they're seeing people buying in terms of snacks and other things, maybe pulling back a little bit. PepsiCo saying, ain't happening. Hasn't affected any of its snacks and sodas so far. Company is focused on package size and consumers' portion control concerns as it aims to reach its raised annual forecast. So
portion control.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
What?
We were talking a little bit earlier about what the snack community has to say about this here. And I'm curious. I mean, it's not just about portion control. I mean, if these drugs are going to be mass adopted, as most people seem to think they are, this isn't just about eating less. It's also about people going to be opting to eat things or not eat things that are bad for you, and meaning with a lot of sugar and other starches and things.
Well, there are some who would argue, and there's lots of conversations, that maybe if we just made food healthier to begin with, we wouldn't need to take drugs and all this good stuff.
I think Mother Nature's on the phone. I think she said, I've been making food healthier for you guys since
That's
the
right.
beginning
She said,
of time.
I've been doing it.
You just have to, pick an apple and, a carrot.
Yeah.
Something else?
Yeah, or free.
Okay. Are you ready to move on?
Wait, yeah, I have a related stock, Celsius Holdings, if I
more?
may. Yes, if you didn't interrupt me, I'd be done. Celsius Holdings up 5.3% in today's session. It's a distribution partner for PepsiCo, which of course reported better than expected third quarter results. So anyway, this one also gained. It's about a $13 billion market cap. If you're not familiar, it's up 60% year to date, but also 25% of the float is shorted. So just something to keep in mind. Enphase, I mentioned solar stocks are rallying. France seems to be upping its goals in terms of solar power capacity. So you had Enphase, top of the S&P 500 and NASDAQ 100. You can see up 5% in today's session. First Solar also rallying in today's trade. And then I just want to quickly mention Rivian, if I may. UBS upgrading the company, obviously an EV startup, upgrading to buy from neutral, citing an improved setup following recent capital raise. And that one was up 4.6%. So some big gainers today, Tim.
All right, a couple notable decliners as well. Defense stocks giving up some of yesterday's gains, starting with L3Harris Technologies down 1.46% today. It was up yesterday by more than 10%, giving up some of those gains. Citi did come out with a note today that said even though after yesterday's rally, defense stocks are still attractive. Northrop Grumman finished the day down by 1.4%. Also, luxury stocks slipping today. This was after LVMH reported results that showed sales slowed in the third quarter, sort of signaling this pullback on a consumer spending, at least on high-priced goods. Tapestry finished the day down by 1.9%.
You know what was so interesting about that report, though? I mean, because you're still seeing growth in the actual goods. I mean, like, you know, the purses and that kind of stuff, the clothing. But I thought it was interesting that the biggest drop was actually in, like, the, you know, champagne and spirits business.
So what does that say about what
I don't know.
what we're spending our money on?
I know, and we've had a lot of people on this program that have talked about that. Those are some of the first things to be cut here when consumers start to get a little worried about their finances here. You know, maybe they'll still splurge on a purse or something, you know, around Christmas or something. But as far as going out every day and, you know, drinking, you know, Moet or whatever else they make,
they may be trading down to Modelo beer. Remember?
That could make sense.
What's Carol drinking now?
That's not a consumer staple?
Wow.
Some people define it as one.
I kid.
What about Ralph Lauren, though? That was another company that ended up falling on the news today from LVMH, down 1.74%. So perhaps some concerns about consumer spending in that space.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But high end, I thought we kept saying that luxury stocks were somewhat immune.
Well, how does that bode for Birkenstock's IPO and the pricing of the IPO later on today?
Are those high end?
$100 sandals? Would you consider that high end?
I didn't know.
I
always think of them as.
Well, I mean, I
always
guess,
think of them
it's
as
all relative.
biblical.
I
don't
mean,
know.
Scarlett, if you're walking around in, you know, $2 flip-flops from, you know, the Jersey Shore, then yeah, I mean, $100 sandals are
Crocs aren't $100.
Well, I think, Scarlett, I think you bring up a good point in that it speaks more broadly to the retail environment. Like, are you still comfortable to bring a retail good, if you will, right, that plays into this world, into the public markets? And so...
I think so, if it's a brand like Birkenstock, right? I mean, that's not just any random brand coming in. I mean, it has the brand name, it has the sales, and of course this year it's been in the zeitgeist for a variety of reasons.
And you know, Romaine wears them with socks around the newsroom.
Only took 260 years for this company to go public.
Well, there you have it there. Stability, Tim Stenovich. We're not seeing stability in the Treasury market here. Remember, we were closed. The bond market was closed yesterday for the holiday here in the U.S.
Not a great 3-year auction today either, right?
On Tuesday, no, the auction did not do well. Look, I mean, the narrative is very simple. That overall, this is a market that wants higher yields. Now, you're seeing the yields move down today. Some of that had to do with some of the dovish comments that you got out of Fed members. Some of that, of course, had to do with the Haven bid because of the Israeli-Hamas war going on right now. So you're seeing the entire curve shift down here. But I think when you look at some of the comments by Neil Kashkari just a little while ago here, I think most people assume that the trend is still to the upside, at least until the Fed maybe gives some clarity that not only are they done, but more importantly, the Treasury gives some clarity that it doesn't need to keep issuing all this debt.
I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, given what they forecasted. Yeah, that supply will continue to come out.
And then we'll see whether or not there are buyers. Like, it's just a tricky time. I'm curious to see if, you know, we get a speaker and we get some growth, and do we kind of move beyond worrying about the U.S. budget again, or the U.S. budget deficit? I'm always amazed at like how it's front and center and then it isn't. And many would argue that at some point we've really got to kind of deal with this issue.
Look, you know, on the nearer term, on the shorter term, Romaine, we get minutes from the Fed, we get inflation data this week, we get, you know, how consumers are feeling later this week. Yeah. But I'm probably most excited for hearing from the big banks at the start of earnings season, because we get a check on the consumer.
Well, and check on the consumer, and don't forget, I mean, this isn't going to be an issue with the biggest banks, but with some of those regional banks, you forget. Think about the surge in yields we saw during the quarter and how that took them off guard at the end of last year and in the first quarter. And now hopefully they learned their lesson from that crisis, but it still makes you wonder here whether they're sitting on some paper losses.
Ira Jersey said, gave us a fantastic anecdote earlier. He said his depositor bank is raising rates from basically 0 to 4%.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not just him. I could share it with you. I mean, it was earlier this year. I mean, I was getting less than 0.5%. Right now, in that same account, I'm getting 4.4 or something around that name. So in just like 6 months' time, they've gone up 4 percentage points.
So do you wear Birkenstocks with socks? We all want to know.
I just wear the socks, no Birkenstocks.
To be continued. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Tim and I are heading out west, so we...
What?
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to miss you.
We've got some meetings with Hollywood folks, I'm just going to say.
Yeah, okay.
We'll bring you some Tostitos.
Well, have fun out there.
They're branching out across platforms.
Yeah,
That's
you
a
can get
hint.
real tortilla chips out there in Los Angeles.
We will bring some back, maybe an In-N-Out burger, too. But we'll be back with you. Jess Menton and Molly Smith are going to be here with you.
kind of guy, but sentiment.
I can never win, never win.
Never win.
We'll see you on Monday, but we'll catch you.
Safe travels.
Cross-platform. Catch us Beyond the Bell tomorrow, guys.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio. Carol Master along with Tim Stenivek live in our Interactive Broker studio on YouTube and, of course, on Bloomberg Originals. Forgive me for everybody who's watching. I'm kind of pulling through for some of my notes. President Biden speaking earlier today, vowing to provide Israel with full support, calling the Hamas attack on the country an act of sheer evil. He is sending munitions and said Washington is sending munitions and provided intelligence support and stands ready to take additional steps to support Israel. It comes at a time, Tim, though, that we know a group of U.S. lawmakers have proposed that the Biden administration pursue a joint aid package for Israel and Ukraine both.
Yeah, that would capitalize on broad bipartisan support for the Jewish state to overcome opposition from some Republicans to continue funding for Kyiv. With the latest from D.C., we got Bloomberg News U.S. economic and industrial policy reporter Mackenzie Hawkins joining us on Zoom in D.C. Mackenzie, good to have you with us this afternoon. Talk to me a little bit about the changing way that you're seeing support for defense spending in the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel, in support for Israel versus support for Ukraine.
Sure. So over the past couple of days, we've seen, as you said, pretty broad bipartisan support for some sort of supplemental assistance package for Israel. You saw bipartisan lawmakers in the House introduce an appropriations bill totaling $2 billion today for Israel's Iron Dome air defense system. But it comes at a time that there is waning support among some members of the Republican conference for similar shows of military support for Ukraine and its ongoing fight against Russia's invasion. And so there's potentially a strategy emerging that some lawmakers have proposed to the White House, that we've reported the White House is considering, to try to tie those two potential aid packages together in order to convince some of the more conservative flank of the Republican Party, hey, if you want us to do something on Israel, we've got to do something on Ukraine at the same time, too.
How does the government see this? How does the Biden administration see this? Because many would argue, or some would argue, that, we've got a very important European front at issue, and we have a very important Middle Eastern front at issue at this point. And maybe what happens from here on out could determine what type of political upheavals we continue to see, military upheavals we continue to see going forward, whether it's in Europe with Ukraine or with what's going on in Israel and the Middle East more broadly.
I mean, White House officials have described the discussions about a potential joint aid package as premature. They said that, Biden has current authorizations to provide immediate aid. The president said today that, the United States is sending munitions to Israel. But there is kind of an understanding that some supplemental package will be on the way at some point. But the line from the White House right now and from National Security Council spokesman John Kirby is that the United States can do both. And it's just a matter of shoring up the political support to make that happen from kind of a White House tactical perspective. And that's where you start to see proposals to link those two together in Congress. The House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Mike McCall had a proposal last night that he floated to reporters, not a formal bill introduction, to attach Ukraine, Israel, funding for Taiwan, and funding for border security, which is one of the main hangups to kind of a second or a continued support for Ukraine among the Republican caucus, all together into one massive security package. So we haven't seen a particular proposal coalesce. The White House has said, this is Congress's territory, but they've indicated some openness to the idea of linking those two
But
together.
it sounds like politics as usual when all of a sudden you get a layering of this and a layering of this and a layering of this.
But at the same time, Mackenzie, there are some politicians who are saying, wait a second, we should approach each of these issues individually, right?
Absolutely. And, that's been the line from, some members on the right flank of the Republican Party that you might expect. And, we saw a bipartisan bill introduction today that, is for Israel and not for Ukraine. There's a sense of deep urgency across both parties to kind of shore up something for Israel quickly. All of that with the caveat that without a speaker or without giving speakership authorities to the temporary speaker, Patrick McHenry, the House can't move on anything.
So I do wonder, too, and I was trying to get a good feel here, but do members of Congress look at what's happening in Ukraine the same as they look at what's happening in Israel? And the role of the U.S. in terms of responsibility to helping out?
Certainly varies by party and by member. I think, kind of the immediate U.S. response to the attack in Israel has been, this is a key U.S. ally in the Middle East. And, from among the Republicans in particular who have voiced some skepticism about continued support for Ukraine, they point to, more than $40 billion in aid that the U.S. has already supplied to Kyiv. And it's important to note as well that the U.S. has provided military support to Israel for decades to the tune of around $3 billion a year. But in terms of recent packages, bearing in mind, of course, that the Ukraine fight has been happening for a lot longer than Israel's, of course, there is a disparity that, some Republican members point to in terms of the amount of aid, that's recently been shored up. Bear in mind, of course, the different timelines of those two conflicts.
Mackenzie, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that all of this is happening against a backdrop where there's no Speaker of the House.
Somebody's missing, and it's a really important role.
Right.
Okay, there was some chatter over the weekend about Kevin McCarthy in the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel stepping back into the role or running for the role. What's the latest there?
So McCarthy has maintained that he is not a candidate, and moderate Republicans say we want to nominate him as a candidate. We are still, there are active conversations happening among the Republican conference right now. We are heading into kind of what might be the first of many votes on the speakership this week. But as it stands, the intractable problem that faced the Republican conference last week, which is it just takes 8 members to stand with, Democrats who are not going to vote for a Republican speaker to derail the entire process, is still the problem facing the conference. We have 2 formal candidates in Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. McCarthy's indicated an openness. He's hinted that he would be willing to come back as speaker in the wake of the Israel attack. But it's anyone's guess how long it'll take at this point.
Right. Max Miller, representative, saying the House needs to wait at least another week to elect a speaker, even considering the urgency of the situation in Israel. Meantime, Punchbowl reporting that Republican Kevin McCarthy telling House lawmakers not to nominate him for speaker during a closed meeting scheduled for Wednesday. So the back and forth continues. We can assume, just last question, Mackenzie, that there are lots of conversations that the president is right now having with Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and all of the allies that are out there.
Of course. You saw the U.S. and several key allies put out a joint statement. President Biden, of course, addressing the nation today, his speech carried live by every single, cable news network in the States. We should expect to see, continued developments on the administrative front as they kind of wait for Congress to fill its role in appropriations for a broader military support package for Israel or for Ukraine.
It's a good reminder to the broader public that this is what has to happen, right, to move forward. Hey, Mackenzie, thank you. Mackenzie Hawkins, U.S. economic and industrial policy reporter at Bloomberg News on Zoom from Washington, D.C. That's why not having a House Speaker right now. Did we also not have an ambassador to Israel? I thought I was reading somewhere that we needed to appoint somebody. So,
all against the backdrop of a sort of a house that is divided, no question.
Yeah, White House pushing the Senate to confirm a U.S. ambassador to Israel. Yeah.
They got some work to do.
Yep. All right, that's going to do it for us. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're coming back. This is Bloomberg Radio. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic on Bloomberg Business Week.
Connection lost.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here on Bloomberg. We are awaiting the pricing for the Birkenstock IPO. We'll pass along details as they become available. And, of course, more details tonight on Daybreak Asia. Boeing says it delivered 27 commercial jets in September, marking the third consecutive month that shipments have declined as manufacturing glitches put its annual target in jeopardy. It was an update on Wall Street today. Stocks rose, Treasury yields fell after comments from Fed officials bolstered speculation the central bank is heading toward another pause in interest rate increases. 10-year yield at 4.64%, with the 2-year 4.92%. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advanced today. S&P up 22, a gain there of 0.5%. The Dow up 134, up 0.4%. NASDAQ up 78, up by about 0.6%. Spot gold, $18.60 the ounce, down less than 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude, 85.82 a barrel. A barrel of Brent, the global benchmark, 87.59. So again, recapping, 10-year, 4.64%. S&P up 22, up 0.5% as we await pricing on the Birkenstock IPO. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right. I'm watching my Bloomberg as well, Charlie. Thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there with the Bloomberg Business News Flash. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic live here on Bloomberg Business Week. We do want to check out a little bit of what's going on in the EV space. A couple of stories on our radar. We do this in our weekly check on the EV space. We call it Plugged In. And when I look at what's going on, there's an interesting story about Mercedes-Benz trucks.
This is cool.
Revealing a heavy-duty electric truck to take on Tesla's battery-powered Semi, the latest move in the intensifying race to decarbonize road logistics.
Hold on.
It's called the e-Actros 600.
Where is Tesla's battery-powered Semi? That's what I want to know.
I hear there's been sightings, like in Ohio and Florida.
Of the Cybertruck or the Semi?
Are we talking about Elvis?
Okay, well, the Cybertruck is one thing. That thing is certainly coming in the fourth quarter of this year, which we're in, and probably production in the first quarter of next year.
You know how he is. Elon, it just takes a while.
I'm still waiting for the robotaxi fleet she announced many years ago.
Can we talk about the e-Actros 600?
Yeah, it can travel 500 kilometers, that's 311 miles, on a single charge, and can haul up to 22 tons of cargo. It's set to go on sale toward the end of this year. It's aimed at taking on Tesla's truck, which has already scored orders from Walmart as well as UPS.
This is what I care about. It can recharge from 20% to 80%. That's a threshold considered the best for maintaining battery life. Like, you all know about that, about taking batteries down, how much it can go before you have to bring it back up. But it can do that in 30 minutes, provided the customer has access to a 1 megawatt charging device, the company said, equivalent to the electricity needed to power around 1,000 homes.
That is a lot of electricity.
Okay, let's move
renewables, anyone?
Let's move on to the other story.
Why? This is really cool.
Really?
Yeah, I think this is... So, this is a really important story because electrifying heavy-duty vehicles, the trucks that bring our stuff from coast to coast, is one of the biggest hurdles to making road transport green.
This is a
This
truck.
is an 18-wheeler.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing that will, I was going to say like a moving van, but way bigger than a moving van.
Having just moved.
Having just moved,
You're very familiar with that.
But like a huge semi-truck. That's what this is.
Moving all the stuff that we order online around.
Exactly. But the problem is the lack of charging infrastructure. That's a key barrier to adoption here. Around 60% of freight routes in Europe are shorter than the 500-kilometer range of the e-Actros 600.
It's interesting, too. They say higher prices are also an issue. Another drawback for this, costing roughly double that of its diesel comparator, according to Mercedes-Benz Truck's chief executive officer, though it's less expensive to operate than a conventional truck. So here in lines, we talk about tipping points, right? And the same thing of costs. Like as these things, maybe the costs go down, the demand goes up, so maybe things get more into alignment. Having said that, nations, countries, ours included, are saying we got to do this stuff.
Carol, we've talked to somebody, I forget who it is, it's on the tip of my tongue, who basically said, who's very bearish on this type of technology and has said, we're never going to be able to provide the efficiency in trucks like this to actually electrify them.
Was this when we were talking about nuclear power?
I don't remember who it was, but we've heard that it's just too challenging.
Yeah, well, you need a lot
Tesla's
of battery
working on it.
power
Mercedes
to do this.
is working on it. You do.
Hey, just quickly, can I just, I love this story. Tesla prices now rival average cars in U.S. after billions of cuts. So basically, Elon Musk, guys, you know this, right? He's been cutting prices of his EVs. It's now to a new level of price parity, I guess, with cars on average in the United States. So their top-selling electric vehicle now competes directly with gasoline cars on price after the latest round of reductions. The lower prices could cost the company, though, $1.2 billion a year. No free lunch. Talking about for Tesla. Do you understand what it's saying? They've been cutting prices.
Yeah.
So now it's getting closer in terms of maybe what it costs to buy, an average car in the U.S.
Cars are expensive. Sam Corris over at ARK Investment Management, we've spoken to him. He's been covering Tesla for years. He said now the fun part of cost declines, life after price parity. There's no reason why battery costs or EVs should halt their price declines at price parity. The product can continue to cost less or it continues to sit in the same price segment and performance improves.
All right, so the Model 3 starting price is now $6,500 less than the cheapest BMW 3 Series, which is often seen as the Tesla sedan's most direct gasoline-powered competitor. Adding in a $7,500 federal EV incentive and fuel savings puts the cost of ownership on par with a 2024 Toyota Corolla.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's going to make people maybe sit up and take notice.
So why don't we see more of these as cabs?
I think still range worries.
Mm-hmm. That's a big part of it.
And I also think the idea that you have to charge it. So maybe I think that's an issue. I mean, I see more and more Teslas in my neighborhood and more EVs, but I think that's maybe some of the issues.
There's also the price dropping on the higher-end vehicles from Tesla, the Model S full-size sedan and Model X three-row SUV, both of which are at their cheapest ever compared to the U.S. average transaction price. In September, that benchmark price for the new vehicle in the U.S. was $47,698. That's incredible.
So I want to go back to Mercedes for a second.
That's according to Edmunds.
The megawatt chargers, there are a few megawatt chargers available at present, but over the EU, they put forward targets for the expansion of electric truck charging infrastructure. So, I mean, this is it. This is what's going to lead it, policy. Whether it's over in the European Union, whether it's here in the United States, policy is going to kind of move the needle or continue to move the needle on this.
Well, in the EU, by 2030 at the latest, rules require that the EU's main road network actually be equipped with charging pools every 60 kilometers. That's a density that should allow battery-powered trucks to better compete with diesel equivalents. That's real.
What holds you back? Because you certainly have this kind of awareness and consciousness when it comes to...
From buying an EV?
Yeah.
Oh, living in Brooklyn and not parking it, in a garage, that can work.
If you had a garage, might you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you could, charge it in your garage overnight. We also don't drive anywhere ever.
Yeah.
We're like very...
So the range wouldn't matter.
Range wouldn't matter to us. We almost never take long car trips.
The price point, though, I think is going to be a big deal.
I do have a couple more things to say on this.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Tim has the floor.
Well, when it comes to
mic.
The trucks.
What?
The trucks.
Yes, the trucks.
Perhaps this takes off in the EU before it takes off in the US, because the EU does have these stricter climate goals. And it's, like the article that we're reading said, a lot of the routes actually will be the size of a single charge. So they could do some of these routes
in Europe specifically.
In Europe, not in the U.S. It's a different industry.
So it's more
US.
doable, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to fall into place before it all happens. Before we go, while we're talking about the world of electric vehicles, another story, we want to talk a little bit about VM Motor. The Chinese electric vehicle maker, VM Motor, said a Shanghai court has accepted a so-called pre-restructuring application by the company, which has been mired in financial difficulty and collapsing sales. So they put out a statement earlier today, saying, this is VM Motor, saying it will adjust corporate strategy and keep communicating with relevant parties to resolve its financial and debt problems. You might recall on Monday that VM Motor was mentioned in a notice on China's National Enterprise Bankruptcy Information Disclosure Platform. Probably not a platform you want to be on.
Okay.
Maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's, remember Apollo Future pulled a takeover. That was supposed to happen. That didn't happen. So there's been a lot of things that have been making the existence of this company a little bit tricky.
Well, speaking of China.
Oh.
Huge electric vehicle market.
Yeah, massive.
The EVs there are like BYD, for example, taking on Tesla. They're not sold here in the U.S., but they're sold in other parts of the world. And I wonder to what extent those cars are going to compete with the more familiar brands that we think about here in the U.S.
Well, how do you think about this? Because I think it depends what market. Is it more lower end or more affordable cars? And so maybe they're going to make great inroads in various emerging markets. I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but I do think we need to keep, I think U.S. makers, I think all global makers need to keep a watch on what China's doing specifically in this market.
It also completely changes the car ownership cost structure. You're not paying for oil changes every 6 months. You're paying for new tires.
The mechanics are different.
But other than that,
yeah,
these things are almost maintenance free.
Yeah, it's a different cost structure.
So what happens to dealerships?
Well, and
this is so much money from servicing.
Exactly, and we've had a great guest as we go through these unions here, the union striking, specifically the UAW, and just talking about the role of dealerships specifically kind of going forward, and the importance of that, maybe with communicating with customers, or do we not need it? Tesla certainly went a different model.
Yeah,
I think
that's a really good point.
All right, everybody, a lot going on in the EV space. There always is. And as we like to touch on it and get an update on it, certainly a lot on the Bloomberg show. Feel free to check it out at Bloomberg.com and really check out our green space because they really cover a lot when it comes to hybrids. Remember we did recently, we talked about hybrids.
Yeah.
It really made a comeback as well versus EVs because it gives optionality, if you will, to auto owners. Maybe some affordability as well. All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic.
Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. President Biden is strongly condemning Hamas for a brazen attack over the weekend that has left nearly 2,000 people dead. Bloomberg's Steve Rappaport with more.
President Biden made it clear where America stands as fighting rages on.
We will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
The president says military might is on the way to help Israel win the war.
We're surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors, to replenish Iron Dome.
But Biden says his administration can't do it alone.
When Congress returns, we're going to ask them to take urgent action to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners.
Nearly 2,000 people have been killed since the war began. American citizens are among the dead and those taken hostage by Hamas. Steve Rappaport, Bloomberg Radio.
Caught in the middle of all this are the families of those who are struggling to learn the fate of the more than 150 hostages taken by Hamas. Ruby Chen was among the loved ones who held a news conference today in Tel Aviv. He spoke of his missing son, Itai.
The last time that we heard from him was Saturday morning, where he said that they were under attack. We know that he was active, that he was in communication for a while, but since then, silence.
Chen says his son is a member of the military and was serving along Israel's border with Gaza. The State Department says more than 20 Americans remain unaccounted for, but it's unclear if any are hostages. House Republicans are scrambling to find a new leader following the historic ouster of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Republicans will meet within the hour to hear from House Majority Leader Steve Scalise and Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, were the only lawmakers formally entering the race. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 advancing for a third straight day. Some analysts also citing a rebound from oversold levels. Stocks rose today. Treasury yields fell after comments from Fed officials bolstered speculation the central bank is heading toward another pause in interest rate increases. S&P 500 index today was up by 22 points to 4358, a gain of 0.5%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up today by 134 points. That was a gain of 0.4%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 78, higher by about 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.65%, with the 2-year 4.96%. Spot gold 18.59 the ounce, down $1.50, little change there. West Texas Intermediate crude down 54 cents, 85.84 barrel, lower today by 0.7%. Brent, the global benchmark, 87.61 barrel of Brent, lower today by about 0.6%. Well, as for the overall market backdrop and the outlook, Doug Sioka is CEO at Kavar Capital, and he was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
Yeah, obviously the emotional weight of what transpired in Israel over the weekend is heavily on everyone's hearts and minds. And, the markets historically don't really know how to calibrate prospects of geopolitical escalation, right? There are knee-jerk reactions into havens and out of risk. But then there's the realization that conflict galvanizes government interventions, and that could be a net increase in capital and liquidity.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Just getting word that Birkenstock has priced its IPO at $46 a share. That word from the Wall Street Journal. So Birkenstock pricing at 46. We'll have more on this developing story as we get more information. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. As Charlie said, that IPO for Birkenstock pricing at $46 a share coming from Wall Street Journal. It was a range of 44 to 49. So just to give an idea, and their
midpoint.
Right. They were looking to raise about 1.6 billion. So it'll be a little bit below that.
Do you have Birks?
32
so
million
my dad
shares.
calls them Birks.
I have some Birks.
Yeah? Are they comfy?
They belong to my daughter.
I had some
now.
back in
She
the
swiped
day.
them. Did you?
Yeah, like probably high school.
Of course you wore them. You lived in California?
Yeah, they were like, they're back now. Now they're cool. I wasn't cool then. I'm not cool now.
Did you just wear them because you were kind of a nerdy California kid?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I wonder if bank CEOs wear them.
It depends on if they're
Jamie
just
Dimon?
hanging out. Yeah.
At the beach.
Yeah, maybe wearing some Birks. Yeah. No, you can't see it?
Anyway, we do have big bank earnings coming your way this week. JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, they do report on Friday the 13th. We're focused on the sector, the impact of higher rates. We talked about it a little bit earlier with Ira Jersey, and some of our team just met and also weighing in. So important in terms of what they can tell us about the lending environment, whether it's corporate, retail, loans, mortgages, like all this good stuff.
Yeah, in keeping with that, we have a member of the banking community joining us right now. Priscilla Sims-Brown is CEO of Amalgamated Bank. She joins us on Zoom from Martha's Vineyard this afternoon. Good to have you with us, Priscilla. How are you?
I'm well, and I have a pair of Birkenstocks, in case you want to.
Ah, okay. I like that. Well, you're also on Martha's Vineyard right now, so it kind of makes sense. Hey, I want to talk about the bank and the history of the bank in just a minute, but first I just want to get your view on what you're seeing from the consumer, what you're seeing across your industry right now.
Well, look, I mean, clearly, as the markets are showing, we have consumers who are having a hard time getting mortgages, trying to figure out what is going to happen to rates over time. I don't have a crystal ball either on that, but I do feel that the change makers we do business with are really the organizations that are doing good are more important than ever right now, because they're sort of helping the underserved, and we try to help the underserved too get access to capital.
When you say, and I want to get into kind of more broadly of who you guys work with on a regular basis, consumers having a hard time, what does that mean? Are they defaulting? What is it? Are they not borrowing? What are you seeing that makes you say that?
Well, I'm saying that because interest rates are high and it's difficult to get a mortgage for many people. Also, access to capital for businesses, small businesses in particular that are expanding, is more expensive. And so the equations are different. The math is different than it used to be for a number of people who are used to the lower interest rate environment. So how that will affect consumer sentiment over time, how that will affect the sentiment of the small businesses we work with, that's a question yet to be answered. But we certainly do hear about and see that consumers and small businesses are concerned about it.
So what are you seeing in terms of consumer spending?
Well, I don't have a real gauge on consumer spending. I read what you do. But I do think that at least in our universe, which again is we do have some consumers, but we are largely a bank for change makers. And what I do see there is that there are people feeling that it's more important than ever as we look around at the status of migrants, as the status of the wealth gap, and more of this division of wealth that you see. The median wealth in this country is something that people are concerned about. And so our change makers are looking to try to help close that gap.
Well, and I so get it. Change makers, you guys were started back in the early 1920s. It was about serving immigrant women who are working in what was called the needle trades. As somebody whose grandmother sewed a lot and was a seamstress, my grandfather was a tailor. Like, I totally get like that economy from which it was created. You talk about change makers. So it's 1,000 plus unions. You're talking about political groups, if you will. So talk to us a little bit about the people that you do work with regularly and what that tells you. The unions I'm really interested in. You know, you've seen an increase. Have you in business when it comes to the 1,000 plus unions that you work with, especially as we've seen it, what seems to feel like a resurgence in the unionized workforce here in the United States?
Yeah, that's right. I think those are all great observations. We were started 100 years ago, as you say, by the needle trade. These were textile workers, mostly immigrants who came to this country, and they couldn't get banking. They couldn't find a way to get services, everything from savings accounts to loans and for their mortgages for their homes, to expand their businesses. They couldn't find loans to get their kids in college, those kinds of things. And so they started their own bank. And here we are almost exactly 100 years later, and still we care a lot about workers' rights. 40% of our publicly traded stock is owned by unions. The rest is owned in the market broadly, like most banks. And we serve people who, as you say, really what they all have in common is they're trying to make a positive difference in the world and move society forward. It includes everybody from political groups, whether that be candidates or political parties, racial justice organizations, social justice organizations, foundations, and of course, climate organizations, and yes, unions as well.
You know what I think is so interesting about this? You go to your bank's website, and there's literally up there with personal, small business, commercial, institutional investing, there's issues we care about, a lot of things you just mentioned. Why do you think so many corporations shy away from speaking out about these things, whereas you guys embrace them, just in the last 45 seconds that we have with you?
Yeah, look, I think the reason we embrace them is because we are proving a concept that you can do well and do good, and we've been doing that for 100 years, and before it was ever a fad. And we think that people have a conscience and business leaders have a conscience, and they serve the underserved in minor ways. We do it in major ways, and we want to see others do so as well.
All right, we've run out of time, but do come back soon. I'd love to continue the conversation with you. Priscilla Sims Brown, she's CEO of Amalgamated Bank, joining us on the phone from Martha's Vineyard. And, interesting, a very different take on a financial institution in terms of how they were created, what they're all about, and they continue that mission, if you will.
I mean, these are issues that corporations run away from, let alone, highlight them on their website.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
We'll get her back real soon. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Birkenstock priced its IPO at $46 a share. According to the Wall Street Journal, Birkenstock will be using the ticker symbol BIRK. Boeing says it delivered 27 commercial jets in September, marking the third consecutive month that shipments have declined as manufacturing glitches put its annual target in jeopardy. The U.S. planemaker delivered 15 MAX jets last month and 70 of its 737 family airplanes family of airplanes during the third quarter. That according to data posted on its website. Boeing shares today advanced 2.7%. And rival Airbus, the ADRs, were up by 1.3%. One of the next big events for U.S. markets will be bank earnings on Friday when we hear from the likes of J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup. Emily Rowland is co-chief investment officer at JH Investment Management.
When we look into the financial sector, about 9.3% earnings growth is expected for this quarter. There are some tailwinds there for the financials. We've seen a doubling of interest rates since Q3 of last year. Remember, the Fed's funds rate was only between about 1% and 3% this time last year. However, the yield curve was steeper last year, so that could play into things. And then, of course, we'll look to see how those loan loss provisions get factored in as these challenges to the consumer persist.
And you can hear more of that conversation with Emily Rowland on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcast. J.P. Morgan up 0.6%, Citigroup up 1.7%. Those are our top company stories.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It's Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We've got Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Okay, Tim. President Biden is condemning Hamas for carrying out a campaign of sheer evil against the Israelis. In a speech from the White House this afternoon, Biden reiterated the U.S. stands with Israel.
And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening.
Biden confirmed at least 14 American citizens are among the nearly 2,000 dead. Biden says the U.S. will do everything it can to support Israel's fight. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has details on the U.S. aid that's making its way to Tel Aviv.
Officials in the defense industry and at the Pentagon tell Bloomberg News Boeing sped up deliveries of 1,000 smart bombs to Israel as it steps up retaliation against Hamas. We're told these 250-pound small-diameter bombs are part of a 2021 contract between Boeing and the Israeli government and are not part of a foreign military sale from the U.S. government. This contract was controversial when the Biden administration made Congress aware of it 2 years ago. Senator Bernie Sanders and some House members moved to block the sale in protest of Israeli attacks in Gaza at the time. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
The Republicans who want to be the next House Speaker, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, are going behind closed doors, meeting with their colleagues right now, making their pitches. War in Israel has added a new sense of urgency to their decision. A speaker vote is expected tomorrow. At former President Trump's New York civil fraud trial today, former Trump CFO Alan Weisselberg took the witness stand. He testified about the overinflated property valuations he used when preparing Trump's financial statements. Michael Cohen, Trump's ex-lawyer and fixer, will also testify this week. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Back to you, Carol and Tim.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenivek live here on Bloomberg Business Week. So the IPO market, which has been very quiet, it feels like for a while, coming kind of back to life a little bit this year.
We had ARM.
We had ARM. We had
Klaviyo.
Cart. Instacart.
Did Klaviyo? Did we get Klaviyo?
I think we got Klaviyo.
I think we got Klaviyo.
Sorry.
I'll have to go check. We got Klaviyo. Ari says we got it. And Ari has an incredible memory.
He really does.
So he's right.
Exactly. I don't ever want to play Clue with him because I bet he would just know exactly, right?
Well, he'd be on my team. Birkenstock, though.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, we heard it from Charlie. Priced its IPO at $46 a share. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. It's the test. It's another test, Carol, of whether or not the recent IPOs that we've seen have staying power.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see what kind of reception it gets in a market and in a week that has already been a lot of news, obviously geopolitics, as we keep an eye on what's going on over in Israel. But it's a week where we're going to get some key economic points on inflation. We're going to get bank earnings. There's a lot going on. So we'll see whether or not the reception, we talked about that 3-year auction, Treasury auction, not apples to apples, but nonetheless, investors not so interested in it. But what the pricing on this, I think, is interesting, is it's in the middle of the targeted range. So it's not at the top end, it's not at the bottom of the end.
So
kind of safe.
It's safe, but I think it's less about what happens, on the first day of trading and more about what happens in the first few weeks and first few months.
Right, exactly. Because we've seen that, right?
Yeah.
Where there's some enthusiasm and then it just falls like a cliff.
Exactly.
32 million shares are being offered up. It's private equity owned at this point, but it's going to become a publicly owned company when it begins trading tomorrow. So we'll see what kind of reception it gets.
Over 250 years old, Carol.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time. Right?
A long time coming.
Right. It's one of those brands that was like, it was only a certain type of folk.
Yeah.
And now everybody.
Now I got to get a pair.
They've been on runways, like fashion runways, because
They're cool.
There's designer versions. All right, don't go anywhere. We're going to continue here on Bloomberg Business Week. Lots to come, including a fascinating story in the upcoming new issue of Bloomberg Business Week, which is all about Hollywood. This story gets into the rain, the